Welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story begins on a night that was supposed to be quiet, warm, and full of light. Christmas Eve. In most American homes, December 24th smells like cinnamon and pine. Porch lights glow softly. Last-minute gifts sit wrapped beneath half-decorated trees. And outside, the world slows down just a little. But in a small Texas neighborhood, that silence was about to shatter. It started with a 911 call that didn't make sense. The dispatcher could hear breathing. No words, just the faint sound of something scraping, like a phone dragged across a floor. Then the line went dead. Police arrived expecting a routine welfare check. Instead, they stepped into a house frozen in time. Christmas music was still playing. A half-eaten dinner sat cold on the table. A single gift lay unopened near the couch. And in the back of the house, officers discovered a scene so violent, so sudden, that it felt impossible it had happened on Christmas Eve. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No kicked-in doors. Whoever did this had been let inside, or had never left. Neighbors told police they heard nothing. No screams. No arguings. Just the usual quiet of a holiday night. But investigators noticed something strange. One vehicle was missing from the driveway, and the victim's phone was gone. Within hours, Texas authorities announced something chilling. They weren't looking for a stranger. They were looking for someone close, someone who knew the house, knew the routine, knew exactly when to strike. And as Christmas morning dawned across America, while families opened gifts and poured coffee, detectives were already racing against time. Because the suspect was still out there. And every minute that passed made the truth darker. By sunrise on Christmas morning, the neighborhood was sealed off with yellow tape. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off frosted lawns and holiday decorations. Detectives moved carefully through the house, documenting everything. Nothing appeared ransacked. Jewelry was still there. Cash untouched. This wasn't a robbery. The victim had been attacked suddenly, no defensive wounds that suggested a long struggle. Just violence. Vast, personal. Investigators focused on what was missing. The phone and the car. Both suggested the killer didn't panic. They planned an exit. As police canvassed the area, a neighbor mentioned something small but unsettling. Late the night before, they'd seen the missing car pull away slowly. No headlights, as if the driver didn't want attention. That detail changed everything. License plate readers across Texas were activated. Toll cameras, traffic footage, any movement of that vehicle would trigger an alert. Meanwhile, detectives started digging into the victim's last 48 hours. Text messages, recent calls, social media activity. And that's when they found it. A message sent just hours before the murder. Short, casual, almost harmless. "I'll see you tonight." Police now had a timeline. Someone arrived willingly, sometime after that message. And before midnight, Christmas Eve became a crime scene. As the hours passed, the missing car was finally spotted. Not in Texas, but hundreds of miles away, crossing state lines. Now this was no longer just a local homicide. It was a manhunt. State police were notified. Federal agencies looped in. And one question echoed through every briefing room: was the suspect running from guilt or running toward something worse? Because what investigators discovered next would confirm one terrifying truth. This wasn't the suspect's first violent moment, and it wouldn't be the last unless they moved fast. By late Christmas afternoon, investigators finally put a name to the suspect. Someone the victim knew well. Someone who had been inside that house before. Someone whose presence would not have raised alarm. When detectives ran the background check, the results were immediate and disturbing. A history of volatile behavior, unstable relationships, and at least one prior incident that hinted at violence, but never rose to the level of an arrest. Until now. Friends told police the suspect had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Mood swings, sudden anger, messages sent late at night that didn't quite make sense. One person remembered a chilling comment. "If I can't have peace this Christmas, no one will." At the time, it sounded like frustration. Now it sounded like a warning. Investigators reconstructed the final hours. The suspect arrived calmly. No shouting. No signs of fear. Christmas music still played as they talked. Maybe even laughed. Then something shifted. An argument. A trigger. A moment where restraint vanished. The attack was quick but deliberate. This was not an accident. This was rage focused into action. Afterward, the suspect didn't flee immediately. They moved through the house, picked up the phone, grabbed the car keys, and drove away, not in panic but in control. That detail haunted detectives. People who act in panic make mistakes. People who act with purpose are far more dangerous. As night fell on Christmas Day, authorities released the suspect's photo nationwide. A quiet face. Ordinary. The kind you'd pass in a grocery store without noticing. But behind that face was someone now accused of turning Christmas Eve into a nightmare. And somewhere on the open road, the suspect was still driving. Still thinking. Still free. For now, as darkness settled again on Christmas night, the manhunt intensified. Highway patrol units across multiple states were alerted. Rest stops, gas stations, motel parking lots. Every place a fleeing person might stop was now under watch. Then, just after midnight, a break. Surveillance footage from a gas station showed the missing car pulling in. The suspect stepped out calmly. Paid in cash. No rush. No disguise. They even wished the cashier a Merry Christmas. That moment chilled investigators. This wasn't someone spiraling out of control. This was someone who believed they still had time. But the footage revealed something else. A fresh scratch on the suspect's hand. Small, easy to miss. To detectives, it looked like a defensive wound. Proof that the victim had fought back, even briefly. The footage gave police a direction of travel. Northbound, away from Texas. Now the chase was tightening. Unmarked vehicles followed the trail. Air support prepared. And officers were warned the suspect could be armed and unpredictable. As dawn approached, the suspect made a mistake. They checked into a roadside motel. Cameras caught the license plate clearly. Within minutes, officers surrounded the building. But when police knocked on the door, there was no answer. Inside, the room was empty. The bed untouched. The bathroom dry. The suspect had slipped out the back. And now they knew the police were close, which meant the next move would be desperate and dangerous. Police expanded the perimeter immediately. Roadblocks went up within minutes. K-9 units were deployed. Thermal cameras scanned the surrounding fields and tree lines. The suspect had vanished into the cold Texas night. Then movement. An officer spotted someone walking along a service road, hood pulled low, hands buried deep in their pockets. Too calm, too deliberate. When police called out, the figure froze. For a split second, everything stopped. Christmas lights flickered in the distance. A patrol car idled. A hand slowly came out of a pocket. What happened next would later be described as tense, but controlled. The suspect complied. No chase. No struggle. As handcuffs clicked shut, one officer asked a simple question. "Do you know why you're being arrested?" The suspect didn't answer right away. Then quietly said, "I guess Christmas is over." At the station, detectives sat across from them under harsh fluorescent lights. A recorder clicked on. The suspect stared at the table. Silent, almost peaceful. But the evidence was already closing in. The car, the scratch, the surveillance footage. And soon something far more damning. Because while the suspect was on the run, their phone had been doing something very interesting. Something they didn't realize police could see. Inside the interrogation room, time moved slowly. The suspect sat still, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. Detectives didn't rush. They never do. Instead, they began with silence. Minutes passed before one of them finally spoke, calm and measured. They didn't accuse. They didn't raise their voice. They talked about Christmas, about long drives, about how tiring it must be to run without sleep. The suspect listened. Then came the phone. Police placed it gently on the table. The suspect's eyes dropped just for a second. That was all detectives needed. because while the phone itself was missing, its digital shadow wasn't. Location data showed movement starting at the victim's house, then highways, gas stations, the motel. Every step of the escape mapped. Text drafts never sent were recovered. Short lines, angry lines, regret mixed with rage. One reads simply, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Another, "They pushed me." Detectives leaned in. They asked about the scratch on the hand. The suspect said it was from earlier that day, but forensic results told a different story. Skin cells under the suspect's nails. DNA that matched the victim. Science doesn't argue. It waits. And when detectives finally laid everything out, the timeline, the footage, the digital trail, the suspect's composure began to crack. The shoulders slumped. Breathing changed. And then came the words investigators had been waiting for. Not a confession. Not yet. Just a quiet sentence, spoken barely above a whisper. "I just wanted it to stop." That sentence changed the tone of the room. "I just wanted it to stop." Detectives didn't interrupt. They let the silence do the work. Slowly, the suspect began to talk, not in a rush, not emotionally, but in fragments. Pieces of a relationship that had been breaking for months. Control, jealousy, arguments that never truly ended, only paused. According to the suspect, Christmas Eve was supposed to be different. A conversation, closure, one last attempt to fix what was already beyond repair. But emotions don't follow plans. The suspect described feeling ignored, dismissed, replaced, and in that moment when words failed, anger took over. Detectives noted something important. The suspect never said the victim's name. Not once. Instead, they used phrases like "that situation" or "what happened," a classic sign of emotional distancing. When asked about the missing phone, the suspect hesitated, then admitted they took it. Not to hide evidence, but to read messages, to confirm a fear that had been growing for weeks. And when they found what they believed confirmed it, something inside them snapped. Christmas music, soft lights, a peaceful setting, and then violence. When detectives asked why they didn't call for help afterward, the suspect's answer was simple. "I knew there was no going back." That's when investigators realized something chilling. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a decision. A moment where the suspect chose escape over accountability. And now, sitting in that room, the weight of that choice was finally settling in. But the most revealing detail hadn't come out yet, because detectives were about to ask about something the suspect thought no one knew. Something that happened after the house went quiet. The detective slid a photo across the table. It wasn't graphic. It wasn't dramatic. It was a receipt, time-stamped after the estimated time of death. The suspect stared at it. Gas, snacks, a small holiday card purchased at the counter. The detective spoke softly. Who was the card for? The suspect's jaw tightened. Because that card wasn't for the victim. It was addressed to someone else. Someone the suspect planned to see next. That detail cracked the story wide open. Investigators now understood something crucial. The suspect hadn't fled in shock. They hadn't wandered aimlessly. They were heading somewhere specific. Someone specific. When asked about that person, the suspect's voice changed. Defensive. Sharper. They had nothing to do with this, but detectives already knew otherwise. Phone records showed repeated contact. Late-night calls. Deleted messages. Not proof of murder, but proof of motives. A triangle of emotion. Jealousy doesn't exist in isolation. It feeds. It grows. And sometimes it explodes. That Christmas Eve wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the unraveling. Detectives changed their approach. They stopped talking about the victim, stopped talking about the crime. Instead, they talked about the other person, the one the card was meant for. They described her life, her routine, the places she went, not as a threat, as a mirror. They wanted the suspect to see what was coming. Because the truth was simple. The investigation wasn't stopping here. If the suspect stayed silent, detectives would talk to her, show her the footage, explain the timeline. And when that happened, the story would no longer belong to the suspect. That's when panic finally surfaced. The suspect leaned forward. No one else was supposed to get hurt. That single sentence told investigators everything. They hadn't planned another attack, but they hadn't ruled it out either. It was a line crossed in the mind, even if not in action. Detectives pressed gently. They asked about the drive, the long hours alone, the moments when the radio played Christmas songs while everything else burned. The suspect admitted something quietly. They kept thinking about the house, about how still it was after. Not relief, not satisfaction, just silence. And silence, it turned out, was worse, because silence gives space for regret. And regret, once it sets in, doesn't leave quietly. Hours passed in that room. The lights never changed. The air never cooled. Fatigue did its work. The suspect's posture softened. The certainty they'd clung to began to dissolve. A detective finally said something simple. This ends one of two ways. With you telling the truth, or with everyone else telling it for you. The suspect closed their eyes. And when they spoke again, their voice was different. Not angry, not defensive. Empty. They described the moment in detail now. The argument escalating. The words that couldn't be taken back. The sudden realization that control was gone. They admitted to the attack. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just facts. The room stayed quiet as the recorder captured every word. When it was over, the detective asked one final question. Do you understand what today is? The suspect nodded slowly. Christmas, and just like that, the story shifted from a manhunt to a murder case with a confession. But outside that room, the consequences were only beginning. By the next morning, the charge was official. Capital murder. Filed quietly, without cameras, without spectacle. Outside the courthouse, Christmas decorations still lined the streets. Wreaths on doors. Inflatable Santas slowly deflating in the cold. Inside, the mood was starkly different. Prosecutors laid out the timeline with precision. The message, the visit, the silence, the escape. They emphasized one thing again and again. This was not self-defense. This was not an accident. This was a choice. News of the arrest spread fast. Across Texas, across the country, people reacted the same way they always do with crimes like this. Shock first, then questions. How could this happen on Christmas Eve? How could someone sit through dinner, music, warmth, and then kill? Friends of the victim spoke about kindness, stability, a future plan just weeks ahead. Friends of the suspect said something different. I never thought they'd go that far. Two versions of the same story. Both true, neither complete, because the truth lived somewhere darker, in the space between emotion and decision. And now the suspect sat alone in a county jail cell, Christmas lights visible through a narrow window, waiting for the next chapter. When court resumed after the holiday, the atmosphere was heavy. No decorations, no warmth, just polished wood and quiet footsteps. The prosecution moved first. They didn't rush. They didn't dramatize. They told the story the way it had unfolded, step by step. A willing visit. An argument behind closed doors. A violent end. A calculated escape. They focused on intent. The missing phone. The long drive. Crossing state lines. Actions, they said, of someone who understood exactly what they had done. Then the defense stood. Their approach was different. They spoke about emotional instability, about stress, about a breaking point built slowly over time. They didn't deny the deaths. They questioned the mind behind it. They asked the jury to see the suspect not as a monster, but as a person who lost control in a moment they could never undo. The courtroom listened in silence, because both sides were telling versions of a truth, and only one verdict would decide which version mattered. As witnesses were called, one thing became clear. Christmas Eve wasn't just a date on the calendar. It was a contrast, a night meant for peace that ended in violence, and every person in that courtroom could feel it. After days of testimony, the case went to the jury. 12 people, 12 different lives, one decision. They were sent into a quiet room with nothing but evidence and time. The messages, the footage, the confession. Outside, reporters waited in silence. Families sat apart. No one spoke. Hours passed. Then more. The jury asked to review the interrogation video again. Then the gas station footage. Then the timeline. Each request tightened the room, because every replay stripped away emotion and left only sequence. And sequence told a clear story. Late in the afternoon, the bailiff finally spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. "We have reached a verdict," the suspect stood, hands shaking slightly now, the calm finally gone. As the jury filed in, no one looked at them. Not the victim's family, not the cameras, not even the judge. Because in that moment, there was nowhere left to look. The courtroom went silent as the verdict was read. Guilty. No gasp, no outburst, just a deep collective stillness. The suspect closed their eyes, not in shock but in resignation. The judge spoke slowly, deliberately. This was a violent crime committed with intent, on a night meant for family, on a night meant for mercy. The sentence followed. Life in prison. No holiday reductions. No symbolic language. Just permanence. The victim's family held each other quietly. Tears came, but not loudly. They had already cried everything they had. As deputies led the suspect away, Christmas decorations outside the courthouse caught the evening light. Red, green, gold. A reminder that the world keeps celebrating even when one life is erased and another is locked away forever. And that's how a Christmas Eve in Texas became a permanent scar. One choice, one moment where anger outweighed reason, and two lives altered forever. A house that once held warmth now holds silence. A family celebrates holidays with an empty chair. And somewhere behind concrete walls, Christmas comes and goes without meaning. This case is a reminder of something unsettling. Violence doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in quietly, invited, and leaves devastation behind. If this story made you pause, if it stayed with you longer than expected, then take a moment to support the channel. Like the video, subscribe for more true crime stories told with depth and respect, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Stay aware, and I'll see you in the next story.